When Double Dragon hit the arcades, it didn't only revolutionize the belt-scrolling fighting genre, it popularized it like no game before it. It was followed up by a sequel that was just as fun, but with a weird control scheme that might have turned off some back then. I was one of those. Good thing that the NES got a port of that game, with the same control scheme. God damn it. Well, you know what, as a kid, you adjusted, because you were stuck with the games that you had for some time, either because you rented it or you bought it. Then Part 3 came out in the arcades and introduced us to the first bad Double Dragon entry in the Young franchise. Man, that game sucked. That and microtransactions. I think this might have been one of the very first examples of microtransactions in a game. After a very different Super NES entry and a rather unknown arcade port on the Genesis, Double Dragon as a franchise would enter the one-on-one fighting craze with Part 5 on the Super NES, Genesis, and the Jaguar. It was different.
Well, that's not great, but it's not horrifying.
Not at all.
That's the best way I can put it. Double Dragon on the Neo Geo followed that, and it was actually a very well made one-on-one fighting game that had a tie-in with the Double Dragon movie released in 1994, but that would be the last Double Dragon game made by them before they went out of business in 1996. Now this is where Evoga comes in. They were a video game company from Mexico, and they were interested in developing a sequel to Double Dragon on the Neo Geo. But there was a little problem. Due to Technos of Japan going out of business, many of their IPs got scattered to the winds across many companies. A company called Million acquired the rights to Double Dragon. Now, I'm not sure exactly why, but for some reason or another, Evoga could not acquire the rights or any permission to the Double Dragon characters or the franchise from Million. So the two main characters of the Double Dragon series were slightly renamed for this title due to the setback. Billy Lee and Jimmy Lee were renamed to William Billy Lewis and James Jimmy Lewis. Abobo was slightly altered in appearance and became Abubo Rao, a fighter from India, while Kang is a version of Burnoff from Part 2. The rest of the lineup was made specifically for this game. There are a total of 14 characters plus 2 bosses who are both playable on the home version via a code. Rage of the Dragons was released in 2002 for the Neo Geo MVS and the AES. It was supposed to be ported over to the PS2 and other consoles, but unfortunately that never happened, after Evoga would fold shortly after the release of this game. Character designs and concepts were done by Evoga themselves, and they then worked in conjunction with Noise Factory, one of the developing companies for SNK in Japan, who then worked on implementing all characters and designs into the game for the final product. There are 9 stages in total. The gameplay here consists of fighting in teams of 2, and similar to other Capcom games like Marvel vs. Capcom, you can call up your partner at any time during the battle, as well as pulling off moves where both characters can deal massive damage to the opponent in tag team style combos. Each character has a default partner that they team up with, but you can override this for a large combination of teams that you can create. You do have ways to counter attacks and even dodge moves if you time them perfectly. Also, this would not be a fighting game if characters did not have special moves and superpower moves. Unfortunately, you won't see much of any of that in this video. Why? Well, because the computer is one hell of a cheap bastard. Soon as the match starts, the computer is all over me like white on rice. It almost always counters moves perfectly, it dodges your moves, and straight up goes combo crazy on you. You know, I can barely get a move performed, much less winning a freaking round. That alone breaks the game for me. The difficulty is way too high, at least the one that I'm playing. I didn't really mess around with the settings though. I left everything as default, but damn, this is like just insane. And you know what? I can't blame the controls because you know what? They're very responsive and they don't feel like there's any sort of lag in between what you're inputting and what you see on the screen. So that is actually pretty important in a game like this. The characters all have a good deal of animation on them, and their designs are really well done and very colorful. This guy here is clearly inspired by Jim Kelly from Enter the Dragon and Black Belt Jones. If you haven't seen any of the two films that I just mentioned, go watch them. They're really good. The stages are well designed, but there's not too much detail in them. They do have obstacles located at the ends of the screen that the characters can be knocked back into, but they don't really do any additional damage, so it's just there for visual. The music in the game is superb, and even though you can't really hear much of it here in the video due to the all sound effects drowning out the soundtrack, you can actually head over to many YouTube channels that have the original soundtracks for games like this one right here, and I would recommend you listen to it. Each stage music seems to fit the team that it belongs to perfectly. Here's a few examples. Unfortunately, this game never got ported to any other system. However, in 2020, Pico Software acquired the rights to the Rage of the Dragons IP, and this game is soon going to be available on modern consoles. It's a nice spiritual sequel to the Double Dragon games, specifically Double Dragon on the Neo Geo. Now, I was going to end the video right here, but I said, you know what? I want to talk about another title that I feel doesn't get much attention. That is Golden Axe: The Duel.
Golden Axe: The Duel.
Released in early 1995 in the arcades before it made its way to the Saturn, this one-on-one weapon-based fighting game was developed by Sega, most notably Sega AM1. It has 10 fighters in total, some of which you might remember, like this guy right here. He looks like Gilius Thunderhead. Remember him from the original arcade game? Well, you know what? That's not him. You're wrong. This is his great-grandson, Gilius Rockhead. So this game takes place way after the original arcade game storyline. But there is one guy who does return from the original. Death equals adder, or is it Death Adder? Why did they add the equal sign? I never got that. What's the point? How do you pronounce that? He was killed in part 1, then returned only to be killed again in the battle with Gilius Thunderhead when the two fought atop a dragon and were cast down in a fiery explosion. Now you might be thinking to yourself, man, I don't remember any of that. When did that happen? I'm gonna get more into the whole Golden Axe as a franchise in a future video. Stay tuned for that one. Anyway, seems this guy, he doesn't die and just, I don't know, keeps coming back, like kind of like the way Commodore did back in the early 1990s with the consoles. Commodore? Is that you under the helmet? Now this right here is a one-on-one fighting game, meaning there are no team-ups like in other titles, and you can't call any other character for help. You can, however, build up your power meter right here using the Golden Axe formula. Now, what formula is that, you ask? Kicking the shit out of these poor little gnomes as they run around the screen. You'd figure by now these dum-dums will learn to steer clear of any humans, cause the moment they get near anybody, they get the crap kicked out of them. Of course, it would also help to stop carrying potions and dropping them when you get kicked. If you get enough of them, you fill up your power meter and you can deal extra damage and can pull up a super move, which I could not do for this video. I tried, trust me. The character's special moves are a bit easier to pull off than in Rage of the Dragons. Plus, the freaking CPU doesn't tell me a new one the minute that the round begins, so you know what? That alone helps. I'm able to enjoy the game a little bit more. Some of the characters in the game are really quite interesting, like this elf guy here wielding 2 daggers for weapons, or Tyrus Flair's descendant here called Milan Flair, or is it Milan? How do you pronounce that? I love how she has this full plate of armor to protect her shoulders, and just her shoulders, nothing else. Forget about the rest of your body, that doesn't need any type of protection, but you gotta protect the shoulders. I love to play as Jam here. Now she reminds me of Cham Cham from Samurai Showdown 2. And no, I am not reaching here. She was clearly an inspiration. I mean, take a look at them side by side. The look, her name being Jam, come on, Jam, Cham, all that she's missing is the monkey. My favorite character though is Death Adder, by far. I mean, look at him. He looks like one badass mofo. Plus he has this really cool move where the dragon head on his shield breathes fire. Now that is pretty badass. Now that move right there might seem familiar to some out there, and that's because that's one of the moves that he used as a boss character in Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder. Now just like many fighting games of that time, on the Neo Geo, the screen is gonna zoom in and out based on the distance between the characters. Some out there might find this annoying, but fighting games used this feature a lot back in the day after the Neo Geo made it popular. I was never a fan of it, but it never really bothered me, so I don't really care much for it. The graphics though get really blocky when it zooms in, but otherwise they look pretty good. The characters are very colorful and well designed. The levels are also very nice looking, even though there is very limited parallax scrolling to give them, you know, a little bit more depth. The music is alright, but nothing that really stands out to me other than Gilius Rockhead's theme and Death Adder's, both which are great. The last boss is the Golden Axe itself, and he takes the form of a golden knight that makes Death Adder himself jealous, having such awesome armor. Look at that. That guy looks bad as hell.
Damn, that is a nice looking armor. I want it.
You know, I think with a bit more polish, this game could have been special, but as it stands, it's a mediocre one-on-one game that came out at a time when better fighting games were being made and the fighting game genre was just so overloaded and bloated with so much crap that gamers were starting to tire a bit from all the overexposure. But you know what, it is a fun game, and if you can get your hands on it and you have an extra controller and a friend nearby, definitely give it a try. Anyone out there played any of these two titles? If so, what are your thoughts? Good? Bad? Share with us all and be back here soon for my next video. Until then, keep watching and keep gaming.
Please look at my medical alert bracelet. Oh.